2 days later, Jake found himself standing at the edge of a hidden valley that took his breath away. The Villani settlement was unlike anything he had ever seen, with buildings that seemed to grow naturally from the living rock of the valley. Walls. Crystalline structures caught and reflected the sunlight, creating rainbow patterns that danced across the settlement like living art. Lyra walked beside him, her steps quick with excitement at returning home. She had guided Jake and his small medical team through winding forest paths that would have been impossible for humans to navigate alone. The journey had taken most of the day, and Jake was impressed by the careful way the Villani had hidden their civilization from outside discovery. "My people live here many generations," Lyra explained as they descended into the valley. "We keep hidden from dangerous creatures and other threats." Jake nodded, understanding now why no human exploration teams had ever discovered this settlement. The valley was protected by natural barriers and what appeared to be some kind of energy field that would confuse electronic sensors. The Villani had created a perfect sanctuary for their people. As they approached the first buildings, Jake began to see the true scope of the medical crisis that Lyra had tried to describe. Villani people lay on soft beds outside their homes, their bodies trembling with the effects of the mysterious disease. Their normally luminous blue skin had taken on a grayish tint, and many appeared to be in great pain. The sight was heartbreaking. Jake could see that this had once been a thriving community, but the plague had reduced it to a place of suffering and despair. Healthy Villani moved between the sick, trying to provide comfort with their energy-healing abilities, but Jake could see that their efforts were having little effect on the disease's progression. "So many," whispered Amy Collins, Jake's medical assistant, as she surveyed the scene. "How long has this been going on?" "Too long," Lyra replied sadly. "Many already died. More dying every day." An elderly Villani approached them, his movements slow and dignified despite his obvious frailty. His silver hair was longer than Lyra's, and his violet eyes held the wisdom of many years. Jake could see that this was likely a leader or elder of the community. "This is Elder Zephyr," Lyra said, introducing the old man. "He leads our healing council." Elder Zephyr spoke to Lyra in their musical language, his voice filled with both hope and caution. Jake could not understand the words, but he could sense the gravity of the conversation. Finally, Lyra turned to translate. "Elder Zephyr says our people are grateful for your help, but he warns that the sickness is very dangerous. 3 of our best healers have already died trying to cure it." Jake felt a chill at this news. If the disease was claiming the lives of experienced Villani healers, it was even more serious than he had imagined. He would need to be extremely careful in his approach to studying and treating this plague. "Tell Elder Zephyr that I understand the risks," Jake said. "But I believe that human medicine combined with Villani healing abilities might be the key to finding a cure." Lyra translated, and Elder Zephyr nodded slowly. He gestured for them to follow him to a large building near the center of the settlement. As they walked, Jake continued to observe the sick Villani people, noting their symptoms and trying to understand the pattern of the disease. The building Elder Zephyr led them to appeared to be a combination of hospital and temple. Sick Villani lay on beds of soft, glowing material that seemed to provide some comfort. Healthy Villani healers moved between them, their hands glowing with healing energy, but Jake could see that their efforts were largely unsuccessful. "This is our healing center," Lyra explained. "Our best healers work here, but the sickness resists all our traditional methods." Jake examined several of the patients, with Lyra translating his questions and their responses. The symptoms were consistent with what Lyra had drawn for him on the ship. The disease attacked the nervous system, causing tremors, paralysis, and eventually death. The progression was rapid, with most patients dying within weeks of showing the first symptoms. "Have you noticed any pattern to who gets sick?" Jake asked. Elder Zephyr, through Lyra, the old healer thought for a moment, then spoke at length in their language. Lyra listened carefully before translating. "He says the sickness started with the youngest adults first, then spread to others. The very old and very young seem to be less affected, but they still get sick eventually. This information was crucial. Jake realized that the disease might be targeting individuals in their prime reproductive years, which would explain why it was so devastating to the Vellani population. This pattern suggested that the disease might be interfering with some specific aspect of Vellani physiology that was most active during adulthood. Jake set up a makeshift laboratory in one corner of the healing center, using equipment that Amy had brought from the ship. He began taking blood samples from both sick and healthy Vellani, with their permission to analyze the disease at a cellular level. The work was slow and careful, as he had to be sure not to contaminate his samples or accidentally spread the core. Disease. As Jake worked, he was assisted by several young Vellani healers who were eager to learn about human medical methods. They watched with fascination as he used microscopes and other instruments to examine tissue samples. In return, they showed him how their energy healing worked, allowing him to observe the effects of their abilities on diseased cells. "Look at this," Jake said to Amy, showing her a sample under the microscope. "The disease appears to be attacking the cells that produce the Vellani's healing energy." Amy studied the sample carefully. That would explain why their traditional healing methods aren't working. The disease is specifically targeting their natural healing abilities. This discovery was a major breakthrough. Jake realized that the plague was not just a random infection, but something that specifically targeted the unique physiology of the Vellani people. It was almost as if the disease had been designed to attack their greatest strength. Over the next few days, Jake worked tirelessly to understand the disease mechanism. He discovered that the plague was caused by a microscopic organism that had probably been dormant in the forest for centuries. Some environmental change, perhaps caused by climate shifts or other factors, had awakened it and made it aggressive toward Vellani biology. The organism was incredibly sophisticated, almost like a biological weapon. It could identify and attack. The specific cells that gave the Vellani their healing abilities then spread throughout their nervous system. Once it had destroyed their natural healing capacity, it would continue to damage their bodies until they died. "This is remarkable," Jake told Lyra as he showed her microscopic images of the organism. "It's almost as if this disease was specifically designed to target your people." Lyra studied the images with growing understanding. "You mean something. Created this sickness to hurt us?" "Not necessarily created," Jake replied, "but evolved specifically to attack Vellani biology. It's like a key that fits perfectly into a lock." Jake knew that conventional human medicine alone would not be enough to cure this disease. The organism was too well adapted to Vellani physiology, and it would likely develop resistance to any single treatment approach. However, he began to see how human pharmaceutical science might be combined with Vellani energy healing to create a treatment that could overcome the plague. "I think I understand what we need to do," Jake told Elder Zephyr through Lyra. "We need to create a treatment that combines human synthetic compounds with Vellani healing energy. Neither approach alone will work, but together they might be able to defeat this disease." Elder Zephyr listened carefully to the translation, then nodded. Slowly, he spoke to several other healers, and Jake could see that they were beginning to understand the potential of this hybrid approach. "Elder Zephyr says our people are ready to try anything that might save them," Lyra translated. "Yes, what you need to begin developing this treatment." Jake looked around the healing center, seeing the desperate faces of the sick Vellani people. He knew that the next phase of his work would be the most challenging, but also the most important. The lives of thousands of Vellani people depended on his ability to bridge the gap between human science and alien healing abilities. By the 5th day of her recovery, Lyra was well enough to walk around the medical bay with Jake's assistance. Her wounds had healed at a remarkable rate, leaving only faint silver lines on her blue skin where the deep claw marks had been. Jake was amazed by her body's healing abilities, which seemed to surpass anything he had seen in human medicine. Lyra's curiosity about human technology and medical practices had grown stronger each day. She watched Jake work with intense fascination, pointing at various instruments and making questioning sounds in her melodic language. Jake found himself enjoying these interactions, and he began teaching her basic English words while she taught him simple phrases in her own tongue. "Medicine," Jake said slowly, holding up a bottle of antibiotics. Lyra repeated the word carefully, her accent giving it a musical quality that Jake found charming. "Medicine," she said, then pointed to herself and spoke a word in her language. That sounded like Zelani. Jake understood that this was her people's word for healing. Their communication improved rapidly as they spent more time together. Lyra proved to be an excellent student, picking up English words with surprising speed. Jake learned that her people were called the Villani, and that they lived in a hidden settlement somewhere on the moon's surface. She also indicated through gestures and drawings that her people were in great danger. On the seventh day, Lyra was strong enough to sit at Jake's desk while he worked. She watched him reviewing medical data on his computer screen, occasionally pointing at information that seemed to interest her. Jake noticed that she paid particular attention to his anatomical charts and medical procedures, as if she was trying to understand the principles behind human healing methods. "Your people," Jake said slowly, pointing at Lyra and then making a gesture to indicate many individuals. "Are they sick?" Lyra's expression immediately became serious. She nodded vigorously and began drawing on a piece of paper that Jake had given her. Her artistic skills were impressive, and she quickly created a detailed sketch of what appeared to be a Villani settlement. She drew many figures lying on the ground, their bodies twisted in apparent pain. Jake studied the drawing with growing concern. Lyra was clearly trying to tell him that her people were suffering from some kind of disease or plague. She pointed to the sick figures in her drawing, and then to herself, indicating that she had been searching for help when the creature attacked her. "How many?" Jake asked, holding up his fingers to indicate numbers. Lyra thought for a moment, then began drawing hash marks on the paper. She filled several lines with marks, and Jake estimated that she was indicating thousands of individuals. The scope of the problem was staggering, and he began to understand why she had been so desperate to find help. Lyra then drew another picture, this one showing Villani figures with their hands glowing with some kind of energy. She pointed to the glowing hands and said Zelani, then shook her head sadly. Jake realized that she was showing him their traditional healing methods, and that these methods were failing to cure the disease that was affecting her people. "Show me," Jake said, gesturing for her to demonstrate. Lyra looked uncertain for a moment, then held her hands out in front of her. Slowly, a soft blue light began to emanate from her palms. The light pulsed gently, and Jake could feel a warm, soothing sensation emanating from her hands. The energy seemed to have a calming effect, and Jake found himself feeling more relaxed and peaceful. Jake was fascinated by this display of what could only be described as energy healing. He had read about similar concepts in human alternative medicine, but he had never seen anything like this actual manifestation of healing energy. He wondered if this ability was natural to all Villani, or if Lyra possessed some special talent. "Amazing," Jake said, and Lyra smiled at his obvious admiration for her abilities. Over the next few days, Jake began teaching Lyra more about human medical practices. He showed her how to use basic medical instruments, explained the principles of antiseptic treatment, and demonstrated simple surgical procedures on practice materials. Lyra absorbed this information eagerly, asking questions through gestures. In broken English. In return, Lyra began teaching Jake about Villani healing methods. She showed him how to focus and direct healing energy, though Jake found that he could only produce a very weak version of the glowing light that came so naturally to her. She also taught him about various plants and herbs that her people used for healing, many of which grew in the forest where Jake had found her. "Your medicine very strong," Lyra said in her improving English. "My people need this help." Jake nodded thoughtfully. He was beginning to understand that Lyra's people were facing a medical crisis that their traditional healing methods could not solve. The combination of human medical knowledge and Villani healing abilities might be exactly what was needed to save her people. I want to help, Jake told her. But I need to understand more about this disease that's affecting your people. Lyra's face lit up with hope and gratitude. She began drawing more detailed pictures of her people's symptoms, showing Jake figures with various signs of illness. From her drawings, Jake could see that the disease affected the nervous system, causing tremors, paralysis, and eventually, death. The symptoms reminded him of several human neurological conditions, but the rapid progression suggested something more aggressive. How long? Jake asked, making a gesture to indicate time. Lyra held up her fingers, showing him that the disease had been affecting her people for several months. She then indicated that without help, many more would die soon. The urgency of the situation was clear, and Jake felt a growing determination to find a way to help her people. Captain Rodriguez visited the medical bay on the 10th day of Lyra's recovery. She observed the alien girl with professional interest, noting her rapid healing and obvious intelligence. Jake could see that the captain was impressed by Lyra's condition and her ability to communicate, though she remained cautious about the implications of their situation. Dr. Morrison, Rodriguez said, I've been reviewing your medical reports. This patient's recovery rate is remarkable. Yes, Captain, Jake replied. Her people appear have natural healing abilities that far exceed human capabilities. But they're facing a medical crisis that their traditional methods cannot solve. Rodriguez studied Lyra's drawings, which Jake had compiled into a comprehensive report. The scope of the plague affecting the Villani people was clearly a serious humanitarian crisis, one that could not be ignored by anyone with the ability to help. What do you propose, Doctor? Rodriguez asked. I believe that a combination of human medical knowledge and Villani healing abilities might be the key to solving this crisis, Jake explained. Lyra has been teaching me about her people's methods, and I've been teaching her about ours. Together, we might be able to develop a treatment that neither of our species could achieve alone. Lyra listened to this conversation with obvious understanding, even though she could not follow all the technical details. She looked at Captain Rodriguez with hopeful eyes, clearly understanding that this human leader held the power to decide whether her people would receive help. Please, Lyra said in her accented English. My people dying. Jake helped save them. Rodriguez looked at the alien girl for a long moment, then turned back to Jake. Doctor, you're asking me to authorize a full medical mission to an unknown alien species. The risks are enormous. So are the potential benefits, Jake replied. This could be the beginning of a new era of cooperation between our species. And more importantly, we have the power to save thousands of lives. Rodriguez considered this for several minutes, weighing the risks against the potential rewards. Finally, she nodded slowly. Very well, Dr. Morrison. I'm authorizing a limited medical mission to assess the situation with Lyra's people. But you'll be personally responsible for any consequences that arise from this decision. Jake felt a surge of excitement and gratitude. He looked at Lyra, who seemed to understand that something important had just been decided. Her face was radiant with hope, and Jake realized that this moment would mark the beginning of something extraordinary for both of their species. Captain Lisa Rodriguez's voice crackled through the communication device with barely contained anger. Jake could hear the frustration in her tone as she demanded explanations for his unauthorized contact with an alien life form. He held the device close to his mouth, trying to keep his voice calm and professional despite the gravity of the situation. Captain, I have a critically injured alien here who will die without immediate medical intervention, Jake said, glancing down at the unconscious girl beside him. I need an emergency medical transport to the ship immediately. The static-filled silence that followed seemed to last forever. Jake could imagine the captain weighing her options, considering the diplomatic implications of bringing an unknown alien aboard their vessel. First contact protocols existed for good reasons, but Jake had already crossed that line the moment he decided to treat the girl's wounds. Dr. Morrison, You are in direct violation of Starfleet regulations, Rodriguez finally responded. You should have reported this discovery immediately and awaited further instructions. She would have been dead by the time those instructions arrived, Jake replied firmly. My medical oath supersedes regulations when it comes to saving lives, Captain. I need that transport now. Another long pause filled the air before Rodriguez spoke again. Stand by for emergency medical transport. We'll deal with the consequences later. Jake felt relief wash over him as he heard the familiar hum of the transport beam beginning to initialize. He gathered the alien girl carefully in. His arms, surprised by how light she felt despite being roughly the same size as a human woman. Her skin was cool to the touch, and he could feel the rapid flutter of her pulse against his chest. The transport beam enveloped them both in a shimmer of golden light, and moments later they materialized in the medical bay of the Horizon Dawn. Jake's assistant, Nurse Amy Collins, was already preparing the emergency medical equipment. Her eyes widened in shock when she saw the alien girl in Jake's arms, but her professional training kicked in immediately. Get me a bio bed ready, Jake ordered as he carried the girl to the nearest examination table. And prepare a full surgical suite. We're going to need to operate immediately. Amy nodded and began activating the medical equipment. The bio bed hummed to life. Its sensors immediately began to scan the alien girl's vital signs. Jake was amazed to see that the ship's computers were able to read her biological functions, confirming his earlier assessment that her physiology was remarkably similar to human biology. Her blood pressure is dropping rapidly, Amy reported, monitoring the readings. Internal bleeding is worse than we thought. Jake quickly began preparing for surgery, his hands moving with practiced precision as he gathered the necessary instruments. The alien girl's condition was deteriorating rapidly, and he estimated that she had perhaps an hour before her injuries became fatal. The toxin in her system was also complicating matters, interfering with her body's natural healing processes. I'm going to need you to monitor her vital signs constantly, Jake told Amy as he began the surgical procedure. Her biology is similar to ours, but there may be unexpected differences that could affect the operation. The next few hours passed in a blur of intense medical work. Jake found himself completely absorbed in the delicate process of repairing the girl's internal injuries. Her anatomy was indeed remarkably similar to human biology, but there were subtle differences that required careful attention. Her organs were positioned slightly differently, and her blood vessels had a unique branching pattern that he had never seen before. As Jake worked, he began to appreciate the elegant design of the alien girl's physiology. Her body seemed to be more efficient than human biology in many ways, with redundant systems that provided backup functions if primary organs were damaged. Her immune system was also incredibly sophisticated, which explained why she had survived as long as she had with such severe injuries. Doctor, her brain activity is increasing, Amy reported from her monitoring station. She might be regaining consciousness. Jake looked up from his work to see the girl's violet eyes fluttering open. She appeared confused and frightened, looking around the unfamiliar medical bay with obvious distress. Jake spoke to her in the same gentle tone he had used in the forest, trying to calm her fears. You're safe now, he said softly. I'm a doctor, and I'm trying to help you. Please try to stay still. The alien girl seemed to understand his tone, even if she could not comprehend his words. She relaxed slightly, though her eyes remained fixed on his face with an expression of curiosity and trust. Jake was struck by the intelligence he saw in her gaze, and he realized that she was likely as curious about him as he was about her. Throughout the long surgical procedure, the girl remained conscious but calm. She watched Jake work with obvious fascination, occasionally making soft sounds that seemed to be some form of communication. Jake found himself talking to her as he worked, explaining what he was doing in simple terms even though he knew she could not understand him. I'm repairing the damage to your internal organs, he explained as he worked. The creature that attacked. You did significant damage, but I think we can fix it. The girl tilted her head slightly, as if trying to understand his words. She then pointed to herself and said something in her own language that sounded like Lyra. Jake realized she was telling him her name. "Lyra," he repeated, and her face lit up with what appeared to be a smile. "My name is Jake." She attempted to repeat his name, but her pronunciation was slightly different, making it sound like Zek. Jake smiled at her effort and nodded ENCOURAGINGOY as the surgery continued. Jake found himself growing more impressed with Lyra's resilience. Despite her serious injuries and the trauma she had experienced, she remained alert and cooperative throughout the procedure. Her body's healing response was also remarkable, with damaged tissues beginning to repair themselves at a rate that exceeded human healing capabilities. "The toxin levels are dropping," Amy reported. "Whatever antidote you gave her seems to be working." Jake nodded, feeling cautiously optimistic about Lyra's chances for survival. The most critical repairs were complete, and her vital signs were slowly beginning to stabilize. However, she would need constant monitoring for the next few days as her body recovered from the trauma. "We need to set up a recovery room for her," Jake told Amy. "She's going to need round-the-clock care until we're sure she's stable." Amy nodded and began preparing one of the medical bay's private rooms. Jake carefully transferred Lyra to a comfortable bed, making sure that all the monitoring equipment was properly connected. She looked up at him with those remarkable violet eyes, and he could see gratitude in her expression. "Rest now," Jake said gently. "You're going to be fine." Lyra closed her eyes, but her hand moved slightly toward him. Jake hesitated for a moment, then gently took her hand in his. Her skin was warm now, and her pulse was growing stronger. She squeezed his hand lightly before drifting off to sleep. Jake spent the next 3 days barely leaving Lyra's side. He monitored her recovery constantly, adjusting her treatment as needed and marveling at her body's remarkable ability to heal. During her waking hours, they began to establish a basic form of communication through gestures and simple sounds. Lyra proved to be an intelligent and curious patient. She watched everything Jake did with intense interest, asking questions in her own language that he could not understand but could interpret through her gestures. She seemed particularly fascinated by the medical equipment and the various treatments Jake was providing. On the 3rd day, Lyra was finally strong enough to sit up in bed. She looked around the medical bay with obvious wonder, taking in the advanced technology that surrounded her. Jake realized that this was probably her first exposure to human technology, and he wondered what her own people's level of advancement might be. "How do you feel?" Jake asked, knowing she would not understand the words, but hoping she would understand meaning. Lyra placed her hand over her heart and nodded, then pointed to Jake and bowed her head slightly. Jake understood that she was thanking him for saving her life. He felt a warm sense of satisfaction at her recovery, knowing that his decision to help her had been the right one, regardless of the regulations he had violated. As Jake continued to care for Lyra, he began to realize that this encounter would change both of their lives in ways he could never have imagined. The morning sun cast long shadows across the forest floor of Kepler 442b as Dr. Jake Morrison stepped carefully through the dense undergrowth. His medical scanner beeped softly in his hand, searching for any signs of the rare mineral deposits that had brought the exploration vessel Horizon Dawn to this remote moon. The air was thick with humidity and the strange sweet scent of alien flowers that bloomed in impossible colors of purple and gold. Jake wiped sweat from his forehead and adjusted his field pack. As the ship's chief medical officer, he rarely joined these planetary surveys, but Captain Lisa Rodriguez had insisted that all senior staff participate in the mission. The Horizon Dawn had been exploring the Outer Rim territories for 6 months now, cataloging new worlds and searching for resources that could benefit the growing human colonies. The forest around him was alive with sounds he had never heard before. Strange bird-like creatures called to each other from the canopy above, their voices creating an otherworldly symphony. Small animals scurried through the underbrush, their movements creating rustling sounds that kept Jake on edge. He had studied the preliminary reports about this moon's wildlife, and while most creatures appeared harmless, there were several species that posed potential threats to human explorers. As Jake pushed through a cluster of fern-like plants, his scanner suddenly began beeping rapidly. He looked down at the device, expecting to see readings for the mineral deposits they were searching for. Instead, the scanner was detecting something far more unusual: organic matter with an unknown biological signature. The readings were strong and coming from somewhere directly ahead of him. Jake moved forward cautiously, his heart began to race. First contact protocols ran through his mind as he considered the possibility that he might be approaching an alien life form. The Horizon Dawn had encountered several species during their exploration mission, but most have been primitive creatures or ancient ruins of long-dead civilizations. The idea of finding a living, intelligent alien species was both exciting and terrifying. The beeping grew louder as Jake approached a small clearing in the forest. He pushed aside the last of the vegetation and froze in shock at what he saw. Lying motionless near the base of a massive tree was a humanoid figure, but it was clearly not human. The being appeared to be female, with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer in the filtered sunlight. Her hair was long and silver, spread out around her head like liquid metal. She wore clothing that appeared to be made from some kind of natural fiber, but it was torn and stained with what looked like blood. Jake's medical training immediately took over. He quickly scanned the area for any signs of danger before approaching the fallen figure. As he knelt beside her, he could see that she was badly injured. Deep claw marks ran across her torso, and her breathing was shallow and irregular. Her pulse, when he found it at her wrist, was weak and rapid. The alien girl appeared to be unconscious, but her eyes moved beneath her closed lids, as if she was experiencing some kind of dream or nightmare. Jake gently examined her wounds, noting that the claw marks appeared to be infected. The edges of the wounds were discolored, and he could see signs of inflammation that suggested some kind of toxin might be involved. Jake activated his communication device and tried to contact the Horizon Dawn, but the dense forest was interfering with his signal. He was completely cut off from his team and facing a decision that could change everything. His medical oath compelled him to help anyone in need, regardless of their species or origin, but first contact protocols required him to report any alien encounters immediately. Looking down at the injured girl, Jake made his choice. He could not leave her to die while he searched for a way to contact his ship. Her condition was deteriorating rapidly, and she needed immediate medical attention. Jake began unpacking his field medical kit, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. As he prepared to treat wounds on a completely alien physiology, the first challenge was determining what substances might be safe to use on her biology. Jake ran a quick scan with his medical tricorder, analyzing her blood chemistry and cellular structure. To his surprise, her physiology showed remarkable similarities to human biology, despite the obvious external differences. Her blood contained oxygen-carrying cells similar to human red blood cells, and her tissue structure appeared to be carbon-based like human biology. Jake carefully cleaned the claw marks with antiseptic solution, watching for any adverse reactions. The girl's breathing seemed to improve slightly as he worked, giving him hope that his intervention might be successful. He applied antibiotic gel to the wounds and began the delicate process of closing them with surgical adhesive. As he worked, Jake found himself studying the alien girl's face more closely. Despite her blue skin and silver hair, her features were remarkably human-like. Her face was delicate and symmetrical, with high cheekbones and a small nose. Her lips were slightly darker than her skin, giving them a purple tint that was oddly beautiful. Jake finished treating the external wounds and began checking for internal injuries. His scanner revealed signs of internal bleeding, which explained her deteriorating condition. Without proper medical facilities, there was little he could do for internal injuries, but he administered a coagulant that might help slow the bleeding. The girl's eyes suddenly fluttered open, revealing irises that were a deep violet color. She looked up at Jake with confusion and fear, trying to speak but producing only weak, unintelligible sounds. Jake spoke softly to her, using the calm, reassuring tone he had perfected during his years as a doctor. "It's okay," he said gently. "I'm trying to help you. You're safe now." The alien girl seemed to understand his tone, even if she could not comprehend his words. She relaxed slightly, though her eyes remained fixed on his face with an expression of curiosity and gratitude. Jake continued his examination, discovering that the girl was also suffering from what appeared to be some kind of poisoning. Her pupils were dilated, and her skin had a grayish tint that suggested toxin exposure. The creature that had attacked her must have had venomous claws, adding another layer of complexity to her medical situation. Working quickly, Jake administered a broad spectrum antitoxin from his medical kit. It was designed for treating human poisoning cases, but given the similarities in their biology, he hoped it might be effective. The girl's breathing began to improve almost immediately, and some color returned to her blue skin. As Jake worked, he became increasingly aware of the risk he was taking. Captain Rodriguez had been clear about the importance of following first contact protocols, and treating an alien without authorization was a serious violation of regulations. But looking down at the girl's face, Jake knew he had made the right choice. She was someone's daughter, someone's friend, and she deserved the same care he would give to any human patient. The girl's condition stabilized somewhat, but she was still in critical condition. Jake knew she needed more advanced medical treatment than he could provide in the field. He would have to find a way to get her back to the Horizon Dawn, despite the complications that would create. As the alien girl drifted back into unconsciousness, Jake sat beside her and tried his communication device again. This time, he managed to establish a weak connection with the ship. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled through the static, demanding to know his location and status. Jake took a deep breath and prepared to explain his situation, knowing that his decision to help the alien girl would change everything for both of them. The maintenance shaft ended at a heavy metal grate that opened into the generator room. Jake could hear the deep humming of massive machinery and see the glow of active power systems through the gaps in the metal. The pod in his pack was pulsing so rapidly now that it felt like a second heartbeat against his back. "Help me with this," Jake whispered to Maria. Grabbing one edge of the grate. Together, they managed to pry the metal barrier loose and drop down into the generator room. The space was enormous, filled with industrial equipment that stretched up toward the ceiling like mechanical trees. Steam hissed from pipes overhead, and the air was thick with the smell of ozone and heated metal. "There," Jake pointed toward a control panel near the center of the room. "That's what I need." But as they moved toward the panel, Jake realized something was wrong. The evacuation point that Commander Davis had mentioned was supposed to be 20 kilometers away, but the mental connection with the offspring was showing him images of this very room. The evacuation wasn't happening at a distant location. It was supposed to happen here. "Maria," Jake said slowly, "I think we've been set up." Before Maria could respond, the lights in the generator room suddenly blazed to life. Standing near the main entrance were at least 30 Korthic soldiers, their weapons trained directly on Jake and Maria, but these weren't the same troops they had been fighting in the tunnels. These soldiers wore different armor and carried equipment that Jake didn't recognize. "Sergeant Martinez," a voice called out in perfect human language. "We have been waiting for you." The speaker was a Korthic, unlike any Jake had seen before. This one was larger than the others, with silver markings on its armor that suggested high rank. Its reptilian eyes were fixed on Jake's pack with an intensity that made his skin crawl. "You carry something that belongs to us," the Korthic commander continued. "The spawn of the royal bloodline. It was promised to us long ago." Jake felt the pod pulse against his back, and suddenly his mind was flooded with images that weren't his own. He saw Princess Lyraveth as a child, playing in gardens that floated among the clouds. He saw her father, the king, making desperate bargains with enemy forces. He saw the moment when the Korthik had agreed to spare the Zilani homeworld in exchange for the next royal heir. "The treaty," Jake said, understanding flooding through him. "You made a deal with the Zilani government." The Korthik commander's eyes glittered with satisfaction. The king thought he could break the agreement by hiding the offspring with human forces, but we have tracked it across the galaxy. It will fulfill its destiny. Jake looked around the generator room and realized that the evacuation point had never existed. The Korthik had been hurting him here from the beginning, using the attack on the patrol as a way to force him to run exactly where they wanted him to go. Commander Davis and his men had probably been captured or killed hours ago. "What destiny?" Jake asked, stalling for time while he tried to figure out a way to escape. "The offspring will be raised among our people," the commander explained. "It will learn to serve the Korthik Empire and help us understand Zilani technology. In return, its homeworld will be spared from destruction." The pod pulsed again, and Jake felt a wave of emotion that wasn't his own. The offspring was terrified, not just of the Korthik, but of the fate that awaited it. Through the mental connection, Jake could see what the creature's life would be like: endless experiments, forced breeding programs, an existence of slavery disguised as cooperation. "I won't let that happen," Jake said firmly. The Korthik commander laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You have no choice, human. You are surrounded and outnumbered. Surrender the offspring and we will allow you to live." But Jake was looking at the generator room's control systems, and the offspring's shared memories were showing him something important. The geothermal generators weren't just power sources. They were connected to the planet's core, and if someone knew how to operate them properly, they could trigger a massive explosion that would destroy everything within a 50-kilometer radius. "Maria," Jake said quietly, "when I give the signal, run for the maintenance shaft. What are you planning?" Maria whispered back. "Something stupid," Jake replied, checking his pack's power levels. The environmental systems were down to critical levels, but the pod was still glowing brightly. The offspring was trying to tell him something important about the generator's dot through the mental connection. Jake could see the control sequence needed to overload the geothermal system. It would take exactly 90 seconds to complete, and there would be no way to stop it once the process began. The explosion would kill everyone in the facility, including Jake and the offspring. "You have 10 seconds to decide," the Korthik commander sighed, raising his weapon. Jake made his choice. He sprinted toward the control panel, ignoring the energy blast that seared the air around him. Maria opened fire on the Korthik soldiers, providing covering fire as Jake reached the generator controls. The control interface was a mixture of human and alien technology, but the offspring's memories guided Jake's hands as he began entering the overload sequence. The generators responded immediately, their humming growing louder as power levels began to spike. "Stop him!" the Korthik commander shouted, but Jake was already halfway through the sequence. More energy blasts filled the air, and Jake felt one of them graze his shoulder. The pain was incredible, but he forced himself to keep working. The offspring was pulsing so rapidly now that it was creating a strobe effect, and Jake could feel its fear mixing with determination. 60 seconds, Jake said aloud, not sure if he was talking to himself or the offspring. The Korthik soldiers were advancing on his position, but Maria was still fighting, her rifle fire keeping them at bay. Jake could see that she was wounded, blood streaming from a cut on her forehead, but she wasn't backing down. "Jake!" Maria shouted over the noise of battle. "Whatever you're doing, do it faster." But Jake couldn't rush the sequence. The offspring's memories were clear about that. If he made a mistake, the generators would simply shut down instead of exploding. He had to trust the alien knowledge flowing through his mind, even though it felt like his head was about to split open. 30 seconds, Jake announced, his fingers flying over the controls. The Korthik commander was moving toward him now, its weapon trained on Jake's chest. "You will destroy the offspring along with yourself, human. Is that what you want?" Jake paused for a moment, his hand hovering over the final control. The offspring was still pulsing in his pack, and he could feel its complex emotions through their mental connection. It was afraid to die, but it was more afraid of living as a slave. Sometimes, Jake said, looking directly at the Korthic commander, the only way to win is to make sure nobody else can lose. He pressed the final control, and the generators began to scream. The sound was unlike anything Jake had ever heard. A rising wail that seemed to come from the planet itself. Steam erupted from pipes throughout the room, and the floor began to vibrate with increasing intensity. 15 seconds, Jake said, pulling his pack around to look at the glowing pod one last time dot through the crystalline shell. He could see the offspring moving more actively than ever before. Its large eyes seemed to be looking directly at him. And Jake felt a final surge of emotion through their mental connection. It wasn't fear anymore, but something that felt almost like gratitude. 10 seconds, Jake whispered, and then the world exploded around him.